Good evening! As the night settles over Hanoi, we turn our attention to the United States, where the rhythm of daily life continues amidst significant political developments. Tonight we delve into a topic that has stirred conversations across the nation: the recent changes in immigration enforcement under President Donald Trump's administration. In the early days of his second term, President Trump has reintroduced and expanded immigration policies that were central to his 2016 campaign. These policies, characterized by stringent enforcement measures, have led to a noticeable shift in the landscape of U.S. immigration. The administration's approach includes increased deportations, workplace raids, and a broader definition of criminality concerning undocumented immigrants. This evening, we will explore the implications of these policies, focusing on their impact on communities, businesses, and the broader societal fabric. We will also consider the reactions from various sectors and the ongoing debates surrounding these changes. As we journey through this topic, let us approach it with a spirit of understanding and reflection, recognizing the complexities involved and the diverse perspectives that shape this issue. Now let us begin our exploration of the recent developments in U.S. immigration policy. The changes in U.S. immigration enforcement under President Trump's administration have garnered significant attention both domestically and internationally. At the heart of these policies is a dramatic shift toward more aggressive deportation measures aimed at reducing the number of undocumented immigrants residing in the country. The administration's approach also emphasizes cracking down on illegal immigration through workplace raids, intensified border security, and revising the criteria for deportations to include individuals with even minor offenses. A central aspect of this policy shift is the increased targeting of undocumented immigrants who have been living in the U.S. for years, contributing to communities, businesses, and local economies. For many of these individuals, their lives have been upended by a government that views their very presence as a violation of the law, regardless of their contributions or ties to their communities. One significant change is the policy of prioritizing the deportation of individuals with criminal convictions, but the expanded interpretation of what constitutes a crime has left many vulnerable to deportation, even if they have committed relatively minor offenses. This broadening of the criteria for deportation is significant because it has led to the detention and removal of individuals who had previously been deemed low-priority cases. For many, this means not only the risk of separation from family, but also the loss of a sense of stability and security that many had come to rely on. This policy shift has sparked mixed reactions. Supporters argue that these measures are essential for upholding the rule of law and protecting American jobs and safety. They contend that the United States must prioritize the interests of its citizens and ensure that those residing in the country illegally are held accountable for their actions, particularly if they have criminal records. On the other hand, critics of the policy raise concerns about the humanitarian and ethical implications of these deportations. They point to the significant hardships that families face when they are torn apart, often for reasons that are not directly related to criminality, but rather to a lack of proper documentation. Additionally, the administration's actions have raised questions about the broader impact on communities that rely on immigrant labor. The agricultural sector, in particular, has expressed concern over the effects of heightened immigration enforcement, with many employers fearing disruptions in their workforce. Immigrants, particularly undocumented ones, play an essential role in sectors like farming, construction, and hospitality, and their absence could lead to labor shortages and economic challenges. This concern has created an ongoing debate about balancing the enforcement of immigration laws with the economic realities of a nation that relies heavily on immigrant labor. In light of these developments, it is crucial to consider the long-term implications of the Trump administration's policies on U.S. immigration. How will communities adapt to a shifting landscape? What impact will these changes have on the social fabric of the country, and how will they affect the future of immigration policy in the U.S.? To understand the full scope of the impact that the Trump administration's immigration policies may have, it is essential to consider the various facets of society that are affected by these changes. Beyond the obvious concerns for undocumented immigrants and their families, the ripple effects of these policies extend to businesses, local economies, and the broader social landscape. One of the most immediate consequences of increased deportations is the disruption of lives. Many of the individuals facing deportation have been in the US for years, if not decades. They have built lives, found jobs, and started families in a country they now call home. Deportation doesn't just separate individuals from their homes. It forces them to leave behind communities they have helped shape and contribute to in various ways. For many, this means the abrupt end of a life they have worked hard to establish. It is also important to consider the psychological toll of such policies. Undocumented immigrants, particularly those who have resided in the US for an extended period, often experience feelings of fear and uncertainty. The constant threat of deportation creates a sense of instability, as individuals never know when their lives may be turned upside down. Children growing up in these conditions are especially vulnerable, as they are not only faced with the prospect of losing their parents, but also the prospect of being uprooted from the only home they have ever known. On the other hand, proponents of the policy argue that strict enforcement is necessary to protect the integrity of the immigration system and the rule of law. They emphasize that a nation must have secure borders and uphold its laws for the safety and welfare of its citizens. From this perspective, deportation is viewed as a necessary tool to restore order and maintain national security. Many also argue that undocumented immigrants who have committed criminal offenses should be held accountable for their actions and face the consequences as any other individual would. However, critics contend that this perspective overlooks the complex realities of immigration. Not all undocumented immigrants are criminals, and many contribute positively to society in ways that are often overlooked. Immigrant labor, particularly in industries such as agriculture and construction, has been essential to the economic success of the United States. As these individuals face deportation, industries that rely on immigrant labor are experiencing significant labor shortages. In the agricultural sector, for example, farms are struggling to find workers to pick crops, and some have been forced to leave crops in the fields, leading to economic losses. This highlights the tension between enforcement and economic necessity. Moreover, there are concerns about the broader societal impact of deportation policies. These measures often lead to increased polarization within communities as individuals are divided along lines of legal status, nationality, and political belief. In many cases, this exacerbates tensions between immigrant and non-immigrant populations, creating environments where distrust and resentment thrive. From a humanitarian perspective, critics argue that the policies fail to recognize the human dignity of those involved. The experiences of immigrants, particularly undocumented ones, are often shaped by a deep sense of vulnerability. For many, the decision to migrate was not made lightly. It was driven by factors such as poverty, violence, or the desire for better opportunities for themselves and their families. The harshness of deportation, especially when it results in the separation of families, raises questions about the values of compassion and fairness in a society that prides itself on its humanitarian principles. As we consider these perspectives, it is clear that the policy shift has far-reaching implications. On one hand, there are valid concerns about security, job protection, and the rule of law. On the other, there are equally important considerations of human dignity, economic necessity, and the social fabric of the nation. The challenge lies in balancing these competing interests in a way that honors both the law and the humanity of those affected. In the face of these complexities, the future of U.S. immigration policy remains uncertain. The ongoing debates surrounding deportation, border security, and the treatment of undocumented immigrants will continue to evolve as political, social, and economic forces shape the discourse. The outcomes of these debates will have lasting effects on the nation as the U.S. grapples with its identity as a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. As we reflect on the ongoing changes in U.S. immigration policy, it is helpful to consider some hypothetical cases and what-if scenarios to better understand the potential outcomes of these developments. By imagining various future scenarios, we can anticipate possible challenges and explore the complex dynamics that may emerge. Let us consider a case where the current administration's deportation policies continue to be strictly enforced with an even more aggressive stance on the removal of undocumented immigrants. In this scenario, large numbers of immigrants who have been living in the U.S. for many years are deported, leaving behind families, jobs, and communities that depend on their presence. In the aftermath, we might see an increase in the number of vacant jobs in industries such as agriculture, construction, and hospitality, which have historically relied on immigrant labor. What would happen if this trend continues? One potential outcome could be the rise of labor shortages, which would negatively impact local economies. The agricultural sector, for example, is already grappling with the loss of workers as a result of current enforcement measures. Crops could go unharvested, and food prices might rise as a result of reduced production. This could lead to a cascading effect throughout the supply chain, affecting everything from food prices to transportation and distribution costs. In turn, this might contribute to broader economic instability as businesses struggle to find workers and costs rise. On the flip side, what if the policies shift toward a more lenient approach with a path to citizenship or permanent residency offered to undocumented immigrants who have lived in the U.S. for an extended period and have contributed positively to society? This would be a significant departure from the current trend of enforcement. In this scenario, there could be several positive outcomes. Immigrants who have been living in the US for years would gain security and the ability to contribute more fully to society without the constant fear of deportation. This could lead to greater economic participation, as undocumented immigrants would be able to work legally, pay taxes, and access benefits such as healthcare and education. The communities that these immigrants have helped build would also benefit from the stability that comes with legal status. Furthermore, offering a path to citizenship or permanent residency could reduce the sense of fear and distrust that currently exists in many immigrant communities. As individuals gain legal status, they would feel more secure in their daily lives, which could lead to stronger social cohesion and greater civic participation. In turn, this might help alleviate some of the social tensions that have been exacerbated by the divisive nature of current immigration debates. However, it is important to acknowledge that such a shift would not be without challenges. Opponents of leniency might argue that offering a path to citizenship undermines the rule of law and sets a precedent that encourages illegal immigration. These concerns would likely fuel further political polarization and could lead to a pushback against such policies from those who believe that strict enforcement is necessary to protect national security and preserve jobs for American citizens. Another hypothetical scenario involves the role of local governments in shaping immigration policy. What if local municipalities were given greater autonomy in determining how they handle undocumented immigrants within their jurisdictions? In this scenario, we might see cities and states taking more progressive approaches, offering sanctuary to undocumented immigrants and adopting policies that focus on integration rather than deportation. This could lead to a patchwork of immigration policies across the country, with some areas embracing immigrants and others taking a more hardline approach. This scenario raises questions about the role of state versus federal authority in immigration matters. If local governments take a more lenient stance, they may face challenges from the federal government, which may seek to enforce national immigration laws more rigorously. This could lead to legal battles with conflicting policies, creating uncertainty for immigrants who live in these areas. In the long run, this could spark a broader national debate about the extent to which local governments should have control over immigration enforcement. Finally, we might consider a situation in which the broader global context, such as geopolitical developments, economic shifts, or environmental crises, shapes the future of immigration policy. For instance, what if a major climate crisis or political upheaval in a neighboring country leads to an influx of refugees or asylum seekers at the US border? How would the country respond to such a crisis, especially in light of the current political climate? Would the focus shift from deportation to humanitarian assistance and refuge, or would the same policies of enforcement be applied? These hypothetical scenarios highlight the complexity of the immigration issue and the numerous factors that can shape its evolution. Whether the focus remains on strict enforcement or shifts toward more lenient humanitarian approaches, the path forward will require careful consideration of the economic, social, and political consequences of each decision. As we conclude our exploration of the evolving landscape of US immigration policy, it is important to remember that though the issues at hand are undeniably complex, they are not without hope or room for positive change. While the challenges of balancing immigration enforcement with humanitarian concerns are significant, The future is not set in stone. Much depends on the direction that political leaders and society choose to take in the coming years. One hopeful perspective is that the ongoing debates about immigration and deportation could eventually lead to more balanced policies, ones that respect both the rule of law and the humanity of those seeking a better life. Many across the political spectrum agree that the immigration system is broken and in need of reform. This shared recognition could pave the way for a more comprehensive, compassionate approach that takes into account the realities faced by millions of undocumented immigrants, while ensuring that the system remains fair and just for all. In times of great change, it is often through dialogue and collaboration that solutions are found. While the path to reform may be slow and fraught with disagreement, it is crucial that we remain open to the possibility of progress. There are already numerous grassroots movements, advocacy organizations, and legal experts working tirelessly to raise awareness about the importance of a fair immigration system that allows individuals to contribute fully to the communities they have come to call home. The very presence of these efforts signifies a transformative shift, one that emphasizes justice, empathy, and a recognition of the value that immigrants bring to the fabric of American society. Furthermore, in the face of these challenges, there is the potential for innovation, both in policy and in how communities adapt to changing demographics. Immigrant populations often bring with them rich cultural traditions, entrepreneurial spirit, and a dedication to hard work that can reinvigorate local economies. Whether it's through small businesses, cultural contributions, or the essential labor provided in key industries, immigrants continue to shape the identity and future of the nation. Looking ahead, we can imagine a future where the focus is less on dividing communities and more on uniting them. This vision includes policies that not only offer protection and opportunity to those who have come to the US seeking a better life, but also address the economic and security concerns of citizens. It is a future that promotes understanding and respect for all individuals, regardless of their immigration status, and one that fosters a spirit of inclusion rather than exclusion. As you prepare for rest tonight, consider the resilience of the individuals and communities affected by these policies. Amidst uncertainty, there is always room for hope, and with every challenge there is the potential for growth and transformation. The debates about immigration may continue to unfold in the coming years, but with thoughtful reflection, compassion, and a commitment to justice, there is always the possibility of creating a more inclusive and understanding future. Good night, and may we all move forward with a sense of peace and hope for tomorrow. Do edlbvt do chnhsad honthi n hondi mbo tnhkh quan change xcv keng v phmcc change sgish tddu change mts dmdlmrv turench cc he ulmdngt trench teng tin sai l chi. Good evening. As the world focuses on the Middle East, a region long marked by complexity and tension, recent developments have once again brought attention to the intricate dynamics of diplomacy, military actions, and the pursuit of peace. Tonight, we delve into the unfolding situation involving Israel, Iran, and the United States, a narrative that intertwines history, strategy, and the delicate balance of international relations. Over the past week, Israel initiated a series of strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, a move that has reverberated globally. These actions have led to significant casualties and escalated fears of a broader regional conflict. In response, President Donald Trump expressed strong support for Israel, suggesting the possibility of US military involvement. This shift in rhetoric marked a departure from his previous stance of caution and non-intervention. As we explore this developing story, we will examine the motivations behind these military actions, the potential consequences for the region and the world, and the varying perspectives that shape this complex issue. Our goal is to provide a calm, thoughtful analysis, offering insights that encourage reflection and understanding. In the following sections, we will look into the strategic objectives of the parties involved, the humanitarian impact of the conflict, and the diplomatic efforts underway to de-escalate tensions. We will also consider hypothetical scenarios to better understand possible outcomes. Through this exploration, we hope to shed light on the delicate interplay of power diplomacy and human lives at this critical juncture of history. The recent Israeli airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities have been described as a tactical success, causing substantial damage to key infrastructure and eliminating several high-ranking Iranian military officials. Israel justifies these actions as necessary to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, a stance supported by President Trump and many members of the US Congress. However, the situation is far from simple. Iran condemned the strikes as acts of war and vowed retaliation. Iranian officials warned of severe consequences, including potential strikes on US bases in the region and disruptions to global oil supplies. These threats underscore the high stakes involved and the potential for further escalation. In the United States, reactions have been mixed. While many Republicans and pro-Israel Democrats have expressed unwavering support for Israel's actions, others have raised concerns about the implications of deeper US involvement. Some lawmakers argue that any military action against Iran should require congressional approval, reflecting a broader debate about the limits of executive power in matters of war. Internationally, reactions have varied. European leaders have called for restraint and renewed diplomatic efforts, emphasizing the importance of dialogue in resolving the crisis. The United Nations has urged all parties to avoid actions that could lead to a wider conflict, underscoring the global ramifications of the situation. As we consider these developments, it's crucial to recognize the complexities involved. Israel's motivations are rooted in long-standing security concerns, while Iran's responses are shaped by its own strategic goals and regional ambitions. The United States now faces a delicate balancing act, managing its alliance with Israel, its interests in the Middle East, and the imperative to maintain global peace and stability. To understand the current situation, we must look at the broader context. The relationship between Israel and Iran has been fraught with tension for decades, driven by ideological differences, regional rivalries, and conflicting visions for the future of the Middle East. Israel views Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat, while Iran sees Israeli actions as part of a broader effort to undermine its sovereignty and regional influence. The recent escalation began when Israel launched a series of airstrikes targeting Iranian nuclear and military sites. These strikes were part of Operation Rising Lion, aimed at crippling Iran's nuclear program and deterring further aggression. In response, Iran launched missile attacks on Israeli targets, leading to casualties and significant damage. Initially, President Trump's response was one of caution, urging Israel to explore diplomatic avenues. However, as the situation developed, his rhetoric shifted, offering stronger support for Israel's actions and even suggesting the possibility of US military involvement. This shift has raised questions about the consistency and coherence of US foreign policy in the region. The humanitarian impact of the conflict has been significant. Thousands of civilians have been displaced, and essential infrastructure has been destroyed, resulting in shortages of food, water, and medical supplies. The international community has expressed concern over the escalating violence and its toll on innocent lives. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing, with talks scheduled between Iranian officials and representatives from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the United States. These discussions aim to address the root causes of the conflict and explore pathways to a lasting peace. As we reflect on these developments, it is important to consider the potential consequences of further escalation. A broader regional conflict could have far-reaching implications not only for the Middle East, but for global peace and security. The challenge lies in finding a balance between supporting allies and pursuing diplomatic solutions that prevent further harm. Imagine a scenario where the United States decides to intervene directly in the conflict, providing military support to Israel. This could involve airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, such as the heavily fortified Fordow site. Such an action would likely provoke a strong response from Iran, potentially including missile attacks on US bases and allies in the region. The risk of a broader war would increase with uncertain outcomes. Alternatively, consider a path where diplomatic efforts succeed in bringing all parties to the negotiating table. Through dialogue and compromise, a new nuclear agreement is reached, addressing the concerns of both Israel and Iran. This would require significant concessions and trust building, but could pave the way for a more stable and peaceful Middle East. Another possibility is that the conflict continues to simmer with periodic flare-ups of violence, but no full-scale war. In this scenario, regional powers might seek to mediate and contain the situation, preventing further escalation while addressing underlying issues through indirect means. Each of these scenarios presents its own set of challenges and opportunities. The choices made in the coming days and weeks will shape the future of the region and the world. It is a moment that calls for careful consideration, empathy, and a commitment to peace. As we conclude our reflection on these events, it is important to remember that history is not predetermined. The actions taken today can lead to a future defined by peace and cooperation rather than conflict and division. The path forward will require wisdom, patience, and a willingness to engage in dialogue. In the quiet of the night, as we rest and reflect, let us hold in our hearts the hope that understanding and compassion will guide the decisions of leaders and individuals alike. May the coming days bring opportunities for reconciliation and the building of bridges rather than walls. Good night, and may peace find its way into our world. Good evening. As day quietly turns into night, we come together in a space of calm reflection. Tonight we begin with a softly curious observation from across the country. Democratic governors, often seen as champions of sanctuary policies, are stepping into a nuanced position on immigration. They affirm the importance of securing our borders while expressing concern over enforcement methods they call abuses. This delicate balance reflects broader tensions in America, a commitment to safety and order alongside compassion and fairness. This story opens a door into conversations that matter not with alarm, but with composed understanding. What does it mean when political leaders cross traditional lines? How does it shape the day-to-day lives of families, communities, and migrants caught in between? Our exploration tonight will guide us gently through these complex questions. In the next few sections, we'll look at how today's news in California, Minnesota, Illinois, and beyond reflects a deeper dialogue on governance, legal authority, and public sentiment. We'll also place today's actions within a broader context of national trends, from economic policies to geopolitical maneuvers. Each thread weaves into a larger tapestry, the story of how America in 2025 navigates identity, justice, and solidarity. As we unfold this bulletin, imagine a calm river flowing, each current a perspective, each ripple a response. Together, we drift through thoughtful reflections. Well, connect the actions of these governors with policy, civic values, and lived experience. And in later moments, gently imagine what tomorrow might bring without fear, but with mindful curiosity. I invite you now to settle in, breathe deeply, and join me as we quietly open this dialogue. As the sun set across Sacramento, St. Paul, and Springfield today, the governors of several Democratic-led states stepped forward to voice a collective stance that is quietly reshaping a once deeply polarized debate. They affirmed the need for stronger border security, words that not long ago might have seemed to belong to the opposite side of the political spectrum. Yet in the same breath, these governors took care to distinguish their policies from what they described as the harsh and often dehumanizing enforcement strategies associated with Donald Trump's administration. California's Governor Gavin Newsom, Minnesota's Tim Walz, and Illinois' J.B. Pritzker were among those who joined in this evolving chorus. While each of their states has long been associated with immigrant protection, offering sanctuary policies, driver's licenses, and access to public services for undocumented migrants, they now find themselves contending with the sheer scale and complexity of modern migration. Their call for order and humanity is not a contradiction but a reframing of old binaries. It's important to understand what has led to this shift. Over the past year, a rising number of asylum seekers, many arriving from Central America, West Africa, and Southeast Asia, have overwhelmed city infrastructures, particularly in large urban centers like Chicago and Los Angeles. Shelters are full, social services are stretched thin, and political tensions between local and federal authorities have mounted. What might once have been a question of ideology is now a matter of logistics and of ethics. At the federal level, the Biden administration has attempted to thread its own needle, leaning on enforcement strategies such as expedited removals and tighter asylum qualifications, while still voicing support for pathways to citizenship and humanitarian relief. But for governors facing the immediate impact on housing, education, and public health, the abstractions of policy give way to everyday realities. And so their message is twofold. Yes, the border should be secure, but no, the solution is not to return to the mass detentions, family separations, or aggressive ICE raids that came to define the Trump-era approach. Governor Newsom, in particular, made headlines earlier this year for deploying California National Guard resources to assist at the border, not to detain migrants, but to support surveillance against drug trafficking networks. It is a carefully calibrated gesture designed to signal seriousness without slipping into punitive optics. This evolution in messaging does not suggest that Democratic governors are abandoning their values. Rather, it highlights the maturation of a policy stance, informed by the scale of current challenges and by the pressures from both constituents and fellow lawmakers. Indeed, many Democratic voters remain deeply supportive of immigrant rights, but they also expect systems that are functional, fair, and sustainable. Of note is the strategic timing of this public stance. With the 2024 presidential election still resonating and early campaigning for 2028 quietly beginning, these governors may also be positioning themselves as pragmatic leaders capable of nuanced thinking in an era that often demands blunt slogans. Their distancing from Trump-era abuses is not only a moral posture, it is a clear signaling that any future leadership must learn from not repeat the past. What makes this shift more significant is how it reflects broader national currents. Across the US, the conversation on immigration is no longer strictly about legality versus compassion. It's about effectiveness, dignity, and maintaining the social fabric of cities and towns that are being asked to stretch economically, socially, and culturally. As we move into part 3, we'll gently unpack the wider implications. What might these policy pivots mean for immigrant communities, for future federal legislation, and for America's evolving definition of inclusion? Let's continue calmly into that deeper space. To understand the full meaning behind this recalibration of Democratic messaging on immigration, we must begin with the people most directly affected, the migrants themselves. Each one represents a constellation of stories of hardship, hope, displacement, and determination. From families fleeing gang violence in Honduras to young men escaping conscription in Eritrea, and from women seeking refuge from domestic violence in Guatemala to climate refugees from Haiti and Bangladesh, there are few easy answers, but many quiet human truths. In many cases, these individuals arrive in the United States not with criminal intent, but with open hands and uncertain futures. For years, progressive leaders have recognized this reality, pushing for sanctuary laws and community-based support systems. But as the volume of migration surges and the political terrain shifts, those same leaders are now confronted with the task of sustaining what they began without exhausting public goodwill or local resources. What we're seeing today is a new kind of policy evolution, one less about ideology and more about administration. In California, for example, cities like San Diego and San Francisco are bearing witness to an influx of migrants that the system was not built to absorb. Shelters are over capacity, non-profits are spread thin. Even the goodwill of ordinary citizens is beginning to strain under the weight of uncertainty. It's not resentment but weariness that now shadows many urban centers. And so Democratic governors are in effect asking a critical question: how do we preserve compassion while ensuring competence? The answer lies in a rebalancing act. Rather than criminalizing the border, they propose managing it. Rather than closing the door, they aim to open it in an organized, lawful, and predictable way. Yet the political optics remain delicate. To their critics, both conservative and progressive, this middle path may appear muddled or even disingenuous. The right sees it as a reluctant concession to reality, while some on the left fear it signals a softening of moral resolve. But seen another way, this may be the beginning of a more mature political conversation, one less interested in sound bites and more invested in outcomes. Take Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz. Long a defender of immigrant communities, he now speaks openly about the need for order not as a betrayal, but as an extension of responsibility. We owe it to both our citizens and our newcomers to build a system that works, he recently said in a local press interview. In those words lies a quiet philosophy that human dignity and administrative structure are not mutually exclusive. And what about Illinois Governor J.B.? Pritzker's state has taken in tens of thousands of migrants since 2022. Chicago in particular has served as a northern terminus for busloads of people transported from southern states. The city's response has been generous, but it has also faced logistical shortfalls, school space, medical care and language services, all pushed beyond capacity. In recognizing these realities, Pritzker is not turning away from migrants. Rather, he is inviting a national reckoning about how immigration is handled across all levels of government. One could argue that the ghost of Donald Trump still haunts this policy arena. His administration's aggressive enforcement tactics, public rhetoric, and symbolic gestures like the border wall left behind a legacy that remains both a rallying cry for some and a warning for others. By rejecting what they call the abuses of that era, Democratic governors are not simply being critical, they are sketching out what an alternative vision might look like. That alternative is not built on fences, but on systems. Not on raids, but on reforms. And yet its success hinges on federal cooperation, adequate funding, and the political will to withstand partisan noise. It's a delicate choreography to move toward lawful entry and structured migration while never forgetting that every policy affects a living, breathing human being. There are, of course, cautious positives to be drawn. This pivot suggests a political system capable of nuancing, a rare trait in any democracy. It shows that leadership, at least at the state level, can be both flexible and principled, and it opens a doorway for future conversations about legal reform, international cooperation, and the deep drivers of displacement in the first place. What if the policy direction set forth by these democratic governors were adopted nationally, not just as a campaign gesture, but as an actionable blueprint? Let us quietly imagine such a scenario, not as a promise, but as a possibility. Suppose, for example, that the federal government worked hand in hand with states to expand legal entry programs, not only for asylum, but for labor and family reunification as well. What if instead of migrants arriving unpredictably at the southern border, they were processed through digital applications, regional consulates, and international agreements, like one might apply for a university scholarship or a work permit? Such a future would require vast infrastructure, bipartisan legislation, and international coordination, but it's not impossible. It just asks for vision. And what if enforcement were truly reformed? Picture border agents who are trained not only in security tactics, but also in trauma-informed care. Imagine detention centers replaced with supervised community housing, where migrants await case decisions while being supported by NGOs and local governments. These are not utopian dreams, but tested models borrowed from Canada, from Germany, from Portugal. Adapted wisely, they could reshape how the US approaches border security. Now consider what could happen if local communities were better resourced. What if every city that received large numbers of migrants also received a corresponding federal grant scaled based on housing needs, school enrollment, and healthcare costs? That way, welcoming newcomers would not be seen as a burden, but as an investment into workforce growth, cultural diversity, and future citizenship. Alternatively, what if the middle ground collapses? Suppose the conversation reverts to extreme, either closing the border entirely or offering unlimited access with no plan. Such swings often emerge in election years when policies can become performative rather than effective. The risk here is not only political fatigue, but humanitarian cost. Families caught in limbo, cities overwhelmed without support, and polarization deepening at a time when unity is needed most. And yet, not every what if must be fraught. What if the next generation of Americans, many of them children of immigrants, grows up seeing this debate not as conflict, but as continuity, a legacy of learning, adapting, and quietly improving the system? What if immigration decades from now is no longer seen as a crisis, but as a managed humane process like public education or healthcare? These questions do not demand immediate answers. They are meant to linger in the mind, to keep us gently thinking as we turn off the lights. Even in uncertainty, there is space for hope. And hope, slow, steady, and thoughtful, might just be the most powerful reform of all. Now, as we move to our final section, let's return to stillness. Well, close, not with judgment, but with a reflection on where we go from here, with calm, with care, and with continuity. As the evening deepens and the world outside quiets, we return to where we began, with a gentle acknowledgement of change. Tonight's story was not one of sudden upheaval or confrontation, but of a slow, careful pivot. Democratic governors, once known primarily for protective stances toward immigrant communities, are now threading a delicate needle, advocating for border security without surrendering their commitment to human dignity. This, perhaps more than any particular policy detail, is what stays with us. The willingness to adapt, not by abandoning principle, but by integrating experience, is a quiet strength in leadership. It reminds us that governance is not static. It is not a fixed wall or a closed gate. It is a process of listening, adjusting, and holding space for the complexity of human needs. In these final thoughts, we find a kind of comfort. Despite the noise of politics, the weight of news cycles, and the very real challenges facing cities and states, there is evidence of something steady at work, a movement toward balance. It does not promise perfection, but it gestures toward better conversations, more inclusive strategies, and the courage to reconsider how we care for one another. Tomorrow, there will still be headlines. There will still be debates and decisions, and perhaps even more questions. But tonight, we hold this moment for what it is, a reflection of leadership that seeks to evolve and of a nation still learning how to be itself. And so, as you prepare for rest, know that across the country, even in the tension of politics, There are individuals trying to move forward with grace. Even in disagreement, there can be integrity. And even when the journey is uncertain, it may still be headed somewhere thoughtful. Let your thoughts drift gently now. May peace guide your night and clarity greet your morning. From all the complexity of the day, let this remain in the quiet. Something good is still being shaped. Sleep well. We'll meet again tomorrow with new stories, new insights, and the same calm voice beside you.